Stewart is a district municipality at the head of the Portland Canal in northwestern British Columbia. Near the Alaskan panhandle, Stewart is surrounded by rich forests, Cambria ice fields, and incredible wildlife. The economy is supported by industries such as logging, mining, and mineral exploration. It is destined to become a major port for distribution of ore and logs. Stewart is in the regional district of Kitimat, Stikine, and is one of the snowiest towns in Canada. In a typical winter, 572 centimeters, or nearly 19 feet of snow, land in Stewart. For comparison, the hottest month, July, has days with highs of 14 degrees Celsius and lows of 7. The coldest month, February, has days with highs of minus 5 degrees Celsius and lows of minus 13. During September 1923, Alaskan pilot Roy Franklin Jones landed his Curtiss MF flying boat called the North Bird at the head of the Portland Canal next to the twin cities of Hyder, Alaska and Stewart, BC. Jones, who had started the first air service in southwestern Alaska at Ketchikan in 1922, had a flair for the dramatic. On arrival, he performed a chandelle, followed by a prolonged slide slip to his landing. This action cooled the cylinders on the downside of his 180 horsepower engine and warped the valves. A resourceful mechanic, Frank Wadman, was on the flight. Wadman borrowed tools from nearby Premier Mine. He made a valve-grinding compound from glass of broken whiskey bottles mixed with oil. 2 days later, Jones, Wadman, and the 2 mining engineers who had chartered the flight were off to Ketchikan. In late May of 1929, the Grand Forks Gazette reported that Stewart was investigating a community airfield. In August of 1929, Western Canada Airways opened a base at Stewart with a Junkers W-34 on floats flown by Walter Gilbert. Gilbert flew supplies to a mine on the Unuk River in Alaska. In mid-September, Gilbert flew the airline's Boeing B-1E from Stewart to Burns Lake. There he picked up Cominco's mine manager, who had been mauled by a bear. Gilbert flew him to Vancouver. In his book called Arctic Pilot, Walter Gilbert tells how aviation changed prospecting in the Stewart area the summer of 1929. Until that time, the difficulty in accessing prospects of copper and gold made them seem worthless, so no precise location records were kept. For example, one trip of 55 miles could be reduced from about 17 days to 45 minutes. Quote, "The individual prospector was converted to the new order of things. All that was necessary was an influx of men and capital." Unquote. On October 28, 1930, Alaska-Washington Airways of Seattle dispatched pilot Robin Pat Renahan in a Lockheed Vega named the Skagway to help search for missing Canadian pilot Patty Burke. Burke was unreported in a Junkers F-13 in the upper reaches of the Liard River. Renahan, Mechanic Frank Hatcher and prospector Sam Clerf failed to arrive at Prince Rupert. Other than a sighting by a fisherman in Grenville Channel, none else was known of the Vega. A new search was started. Ansel Ekman, chief pilot for Alaska-Washington Airways, left Seattle on November 3rd, searching south of Prince Rupert. 2 RCAF Fairchild FC-2Ws from Jericho Beach at Vancouver arrived at Prince Rupert on November 11th and met Ekman. Following a report of wreckage, the 2 Fairchilds began a search of the Portland Canal to Stewart. Flight Lieutenant L.E. Finney and Flying Officer C.R. Dunlop found nothing and returned to Prince Rupert. The logbook of Corporal William Cecil Atwood shows he and Dunlop flew a Fairchild on the search until November 28th, when they returned to Comox Lake. In response to a report of a body seen in the Portland Canal at Stewart, Ansel Ekman flew Alaska-Washington Airways Vega to Hyder, Alaska, which adjoins Stewart, BC. Ekman left Ketchikan at 9 a.m. on November 13, 1930, landing amid ice floes at the head of the canal. He was met by a BC provincial police sergeant who informed him that the deceased was a local man. Ekman returned to Ketchikan at 5 p.m. During the summer of 1933, a Pacific Airways Junkers F-13 was based at Stewart, serving the needs of Premier Gold Mines Limited. In 1934, a Canadian Airways 1928 Fokker Universal, powered by a Wright J5 engine, arrived at Stewart, flown by Maurice McGregor along with an engineer. They were hauling supplies and equipment from either Stewart or Hyder to a mine at Tom McKay Lake, a small lake at an elevation of 4,000 feet. The following year, 1935, William Archibald of the Consolidated Mining Company arrived at Stewart in a de Havilland DH-60 Moth on floats, later leaving for Ketchikan, Alaska. Central BC Airways pilot Alif Carey, known as Pat, arrived at Stewart at the end of July 1946 with a Norseman that had belonged to the RCAF. Carey began work for Tommy McKay, exploring behind the Franklin Glacier. In late August 1953, an RCAF Norseman Mark V on floats from Whitehorse landed at the head of the Portland Canal at Stewart, tying up to the Imperial Oil Fuel Dock. The Norseman was part of a search for an Aranca sedan missing on a flight from Atlin to Stewart 2 days earlier. Stewart became the supply point for the Grand Duke copper mine about 25 miles north of the town. It was inaccessible except by air. A landing strip was built on top of a 3,000-foot high glacier. In 1953, Dan McIver, working for Central BC Airways, began a series of flights in Junkers 33s and 34s and de Havilland Beavers. McIver recalled landing at the mine strip, finding it covered with 10 feet of powder snow. This required snowshoes and to tramp back and forth to compact the snow sufficiently for takeoff. Also in 1953, Central BC Airways became Pacific Western Airlines and began flying larger aircraft into the mine, first DC-3s and later the Curtiss C-46, after considerable improvement to the strip, but still a hair-raising operation. The two C-46s had been leased by Pacific Western from the Flying Tigers in the United States and used on DEW-line operations starting in 1955. Aviation author Chris Waite flew in both aircraft while employed with Pacific Western in the Arctic. CFMAI was a 1937 Fairchild 82A that Grand Duke Mines purchased from Associated Air Taxi in Vancouver in 1954 to support its mining operations near Stewart. In late July 1956, about a year and a half later, the aircraft was airdropping supplies at the Salmon Glacier near the mine when it was caught in a severe downdraft, lost control, and crashed into the glacier. Stewart's airport is known as ZST. It is a registered aerodrome adjacent to the community. It shares airspace with the nearby Stewart Water Aerodrome and Hyder Seaplane Base. The neighboring seaplane base's water runways in the Portland Canal are on the Canada-United States border. Stewart's airport has 2 asphalt runways and 1 helipad. The east-west runway is almost 12,000 feet long by 150 feet, but the landing threshold at each end is displaced 2,000 feet. A new 20,000 square foot international arrival station was completed in November 2020. Stewart Airport has 1 main terminal with 8 passenger gates.